But welcome to the March 2025 CTIPP CAN call. And welcome to my childhood bedroom for those of you who have seen me in another place. I get to be in my parents' home today, which is very exciting. I'm driving back to DC after this. But we have a really exciting call. Tina Brooks from CTIPP's board of directors is joining the call now, and she is joined by Jonathan Enix, who was a volunteer who they will talk more about their work here in a bit. Jonathan just introduced himself in the chat. Thank you, Jonathan. So we're going to be talking about a long-term project that CTIPP has undertaken around developing organizational values and going through that process. And we are at the point that, A, we want to share the process that was gone through. It's been a number of years of work. We also, at this point, want to make sure that we are getting feedback from you all as to if these are the right values and how these values apply to the movement as a whole, because while CTIPP itself is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, we have our own mission. Our mission and our goals are really oriented toward trying to support the trauma-informed movement as a whole, right? And so we want for the values, we want for our mission and vision to be aligned, and we have continued to work on that. And we felt as though it was a wonderful opportunity in today's call to leverage your expertise and wisdom, all of the work that you do from all around the country to help us inform where we are in this process that we're in. Before we get to that very quickly, wanted to share two things in the chat. For those of you who are on our listserv, you will get an email, and you probably already got one. I know what it's like to be overwhelmed by the number of mass emails that there are. And so and we try to be very sensitive to how many of these we're sending out. But CTIPP started its first ever individual fundraising campaign that we call Amplify 2025, that I put the chat or the link to in the chat. We are very aware and also sensitive that right now is a challenging time for a lot of people to give, right? And so we want to make sure that we are very, very clear in all of our messaging that there is no pay for play with CTIPP. You do not have to pay CTIPP to leverage our services. While at the same time, there is a reality that we are a 501c3 organization, and as a nonprofit that does not charge for trainings or any of the resources that we provide, donations are important. And so if you are able to donate, we wanted to share that. We also wanted to share that what we are fundraising around is trying to build support for individual advocates at local and state as well as federal levels to be able to leverage the advocacy software that we have purchased, because that can get very expensive, for you all to lead on legislative advocacy that you all are working on in your localities. And so in the chat, you'll find two links. One is the link to the Amplify 2025 page. The other link is to a blog post that itself is, it describes the process of being able to submit a piece of legislation and be able to work with us if there is legislation at the local or state level that you all are working on, that you think that having access to advocacy software that can help send direct and targeted messages to your legislators, if that could be helpful. We want to be able to partner with you all and be as good of partners as possible in this work, and recognize that while we focus on federal legislation that we will be sharing more about in the months to come, there is so much other legislation that's happening at the state and local level. And so we wanted to share, A, the campaign, B, as importantly to us, is the resource itself as we look to continue to support advocacy at the local, state, national, and tribal levels all throughout the country. And we see trauma-informed legislation growing around the world. We also want to support advocacy to organizations, but this software that we purchased is around connecting with like legislators, elected officials. So we support folks doing advocacy to a nonprofit organization or to a for-profit company to become a trauma-informed workplace. That's just not going to be what this software is likely able to support, just so you know, but we're happy to support in those areas as well. So just wanted to give that heads up before we get started with the call. You will hear a shot, like I am going to mostly be quiet today, which is probably a welcome change to a lot of the ways that recent CTIPP CAN calls go. So I appreciate the shake of the head there. That means a lot. But it will be mostly Tina Brooks. And Tina, before I turn it over to you, just need to give a ton of credit that Tina really didn't want us to give, but um, we know how important organizational leadership is in creating change. And Tina, since coming onto our board, has gone from being a member of the board of directors to on our executive committee and is now the vice chair of our board. And from her leadership position over the last several years, has really championed the work of creating a culture of belonging within our organization, within ensuring that we are aligning with ABDEIJ values throughout the organization, and over the last few years in creating this values process that we are coming to today. And so, Tina, I will let you introduce yourself the way that you would like to, whether it's, the CTIP Board of Directors, your full-time job in New York, whatever you would like. But for all of the work over the last few years that has gone into what will be shared on today's call from everybody at CTIP, the rest of the board, staff, our network. Just thank you for your leadership and commitment for all the work you do. And with that, I turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. Is Jonathan on as well?
Jonathan is on.
Hi. So Jonathan, hi, and get to say hello to you before we started. And thank you for the really warm introduction, Jesse. And I have to say, my camera has decided not to work. It may periodically turn it off, but we'll see. Jesse, are you going to be advancing slides?
If you would like me to, I can do that.
That'd be great. As Jesse says, my name's Tina Brooks. I am the vice chair of the board of directors for CTIP. I also am doing double duty. I've been for a while, looking forward to transitioning from that and chairing the ABDEIJ committee. So I'm really excited to talk with you about our progress. And just for some context, I remember about maybe 2 or 3 years ago, around December, that was the last time I presented to the board. And it was literally, I think, myself and Father Paul and some ideas that we had as an organization about where we wanted to go, where we wanted to be. And, I think like any journey, we're not there just yet, but really excited with the progress we've made so far and looking forward to sharing it with you. The other thing I want to acknowledge is the other members of the ABDEIJ committee and executive, too many folks to name today, but just want to acknowledge that none of this work is ever done in isolation, and they've been wonderful collaborators and thought partners throughout every step in this process. So want to acknowledge their work and their commitment to really moving this forward. So Jess, if you want to go to the next slide. So today, as Jesse mentioned, I want to introduce this group to the ABDEIJ. Acronyms keep growing every other week, so I'm trying to keep track. The committee's mission and the vision, talk about the committee's process for developing values, review the draft values, and then talk with you about a draft proposal that we've been working on for an advisory council. And that's definitely not the name of choice. We've called it different things, a wisdom circle. But we're looking for your thoughts as people who are leaders in this work about what good advisory groups might look like or have been in your experience. So really excited again to speak with you all today. Next slide, Jesse. So a little bit about how we started. As a small organization, as a newer organization, we really started in a very grassroots way, and that people who were committed to this work came together, and under the leadership of Sandy Bloom, we had something called the Orchestra Group, and it was literally people coming together around interests and ideas that they wanted to move forward. And one of the areas was DEI. So this group was comprised of people on the board of directors who were really coming in and starting to sort of look at and think about what does DEI mean for us as an organization. Where are we? Where do we need to be? And we did a series of things that many of you have probably done in your own organizations. We started looking at our website, seeing how the world, how other people interested in this work might look at us and think about us as an organization versus what we're putting out into the community through our website. That's often a major point of interface, and making recommendations there, getting a sense of what board member knowledge and capacity was around DEI and what sort of trainings people have been doing and recommending. So from there, we as an orchestra group made some recommendations and share them with the board to really start thinking more about how we can incorporate DEI into our work. And some other things that happened along the way as CTIPP was at a point where we started off as a very small grassroots organization, sort of taking that step toward a more organized structure. There was really a thinking and looking at like what sort of governance structure do we need? What sort of working committees do we need? And part of that restructuring process, and there was a lot that went into it, but the parts that are really relevant to today's presentation is that we realized that we need to have a DEIJ committee and to make sure that it was a governance committee and to really ensure that it is centered and built into the foundations of the organization moving forward. So from that decision, with that position, the AEDIJ chair became a member of the executive committee. I agreed to take on that role, and I've been with the executive committee for a few years now. Well, a lot of our work as people who are probably have done some of this work in your own organization, we really wanted to really understand what grounded us in the work. So, the committee started roughly in May 2021, and rather than jumping into the quote-unquote work, and I'm not on camera, but I'm doing the air quotes, I think there's often a real urgency to start doing things when we're looking at this work, which makes all the sense in the world. There's often so much urgency that we're responding to in the organization, but we really had a strong feeling that we needed to understand each other and really get to commit to knowing each other as a board, as colleagues who are going to be working together in this committee. And I don't know if I mentioned that, but so I was the chair, and the committee has been comprised of people who have volunteered their time on the board of directors to be a part of this committee. So once we brought people on in May 2021, we spent about a good 6 months to a year getting to know each other, getting to understand CTIPP around this question of DEIJ and what it means to us as an organization. And we took several steps along the way that led us to the values. Next slide. So, and some of the things that we did along that way is, I'll talk a little bit about the work that we did with the consultant, but really just doing a scan of the organization and thinking about how we as board members experienced it, some of the feedback we were getting from our community stakeholders as well. And there's a lot of work that happened in between there. So it's kind of a jump in time that we got to the point where we had a mission and vision, but this is the vision for the committee. And you'll notice that along the way, there was also an AB that was joined to the DEIJ committee. And that came out of, I'll talk a little bit about some of the culture of belonging work that we did with the consultant who worked with us, but really making sure that whatever acronym we came up with really represented the values that CTIPP was wanting to embody in our work. And accessibility and belonging was a really important part of that discussion. And there was acknowledgement and understanding that I think that is often a part of DEIJ, but a real need to be explicit and intentional about what that means for us as an organization. Part of doing that was making sure it was a part of the title of the committee. So we are the ABDEIJ committee now. And this is the purpose and the goals. I'll just read it quickly. We are charged with advising CTIPP on DEIJ considerations related to its internal policies and procedures, as well as its public policy process and practice recommendations. This work aims to ensure that CTIPP's agenda and priorities reflect CTIPP's commitment to accessibility, belonging, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. So that's the committee's description and the vision for the work. Next slide. So I mentioned a consultant that we work with who was wonderful, who really introduced us and spent time talking with the board of directors about the idea of culture of belonging. And that really resonated to us as a national organization, the type of environment we want to create and the kind of partnership we want to have with the community. So all of our work is really stemming from that framework. Will, who I will put his name and information in the chat when we switch to the next presenter, because he really is amazing and highly recommended. But there are some things that he worked very closely with us on based on some of the work that we did in that period where we're really thinking about what CTIPP is, what the gaps are, and where we think we want to be. The first was understanding CTIPP's current strengths and areas needing improvement to refine the organization's efforts to recruit and retain diverse voices on the board and with the organization, identifying mechanisms to have all committees of CTIPPs embed an ABDEIJ lens to policies, practices, decision-making, communication, strategy, and overall board processes and governance. Reviewing and making recommendations on how to monitor and measure ABDEIJ goals for CTIPP and recommending a method for regular feedback specific to ABDEIJ and trauma-informed care, recommending ways to promote shared language and understanding of ABDEIJ work, and developing messaging about the intersection of ABDEIJ and trauma-informed care. So that was a really significant scope of work for us to take on. And, I think we were all very, very aspirational about where we wanted to be. And I remember very clearly at the end of this process, we were all kind of like, well, wow, that is so much work for us to take on as an organization. And I say that to say, as I think this work is often overwhelming for people in this space committed to this level of change. But those were the scope of work with our consultants, which is very ambitious. Out of that work, and I won't go through all of the process, but we'll spend a lot of time working with our executive committee, working with the full board of directors, getting some feedback from people who had also been involved with CTIPP in the past as well. I'm really trying to get as many perspectives as possible in addition to working with the organization leadership. Out of that work, there was a strategic report that really identified some priority areas. Next slide. So the recommendations from the tactical plan, the primary ones, there are some other ones that we're also working on that we'll probably focus on a little bit further down the road, but the ones that were really the key ones that were really driving forces for us moving forward. Developing strategy to ensure ABDEIJ principles are integrated into CTIPP's work and aligned across the organization. It was very important that CTIPP as an organization is really modeling that model, and we are setting the standard for what that looks like for us. And it's hard for us to talk about that with our partners if we aren't looking at and doing that work. So really thinking about all the different places where CTIPP works and functions as an organization and making sure that there's really alignment of those principles across all of those different places. So that means the work that happens with organizational staff, that means the work that happens with the board of directors, and really making sure that all of those things are congruent with each other. Creating an organizational structure that supports CTIPP's goal of becoming a trauma-informed, healing-centered organization. Again, making sure that we are really modeling the behavior that we're advocating for in a trauma-informed society, and really looking at our structures and functions as a board and as a newer organization to make sure that we are really embodying and living those values and our organizational structure. And we're definitely very much, I think, on the road to and continuing to understand what that means for us as an organization every day. So it's definitely been a growth curve for us and something that's very much in process. Developing a framework, a tool, or a checklist for equitable decision making and policy and practice. I'm not going to talk about that too much today, but we have made some great progress around having some ways to bring in a consensus-driven process, or moving toward one that really is, they're big. I think boards rely very much on Robert's Rules of Order, and I'm making a mean face from across my table because I think a lot of people find that those structures and more traditional ways of functioning sometimes create divide and really shut down certain voices in the organization. So we spent a lot of time looking and thinking about, like, what is a decision-making process that we can start to think about. I've made some significant progress in coming up with a framework that we're going to be trying on and testing out over the course of the next year to kind of hopefully land on a way of making sure that everyone is involved in the decision-making process at the board level, and that we're also working with Jesse and his team and the CTIPP staff in that process. So we're all kind of making sure that our voices are heard throughout the decision-making process. And then advancing CTIPP as a thought leader in the trauma resilient space by sharing lessons learned and current strategies used to link DEI, J, and belonging to trauma-informed work, and starting to think more about how can we quantify that, or qualify that, what does that mean for us as an organization, how are we measuring and understanding that. And this is really one of the first steps for us in kind of sharing some more of that work and some of our progress and some of our pain points too along the way, because there were certainly many. But the thing I want to talk about and transition to is talking about establishing a value statement. And I put that in process, although we have made incredible progress. I'm excited to talk about. Next slide. So a little bit about our process. And really, thinking about this is really beginning to explore, thinking about some of the key concepts and core values during our board meetings. We have some wonderful board members who have been leading the board of directors in this process of really thinking about, where do these values, what values come up for CTIPP as we are in the process of thinking about what it means for us in the organization to have a leadership in the trauma-informed movement. So we spent, I would say, about a year dedicating part of our board meeting to really looking at and thinking about what are some of the key ideas for us as an organization and how those really sort of lead towards some core values. The committee also led several the ABDIJ committee led several brainstorming sessions to really build on this work and thinking about, what does this mean for us as an organization? Again, building on the work at the board directors. And from that, we came up with some draft ideas that were further explored and refined during our board meetings. And then having a thematic analysis of all CTIPP core documents and conducted by volunteers, and a thematic analysis that Jonathan, I'm going to introduce him in just a second to talk with you about. Part of our work that led us toward the thematic analysis, basically doing an ad. We were looking for people to volunteer who wanted to help support us, who do qualitative work. That was really important for us for a lot of reasons. One, as a board, we're really busy, although there are a lot of academics on our board. The other thing, and I think you all probably know, it's really important and really intimidating to have someone come out from outside and look at your organization. And really sort of, they're going to see things that you can't see and sometimes don't always want to see. So that process has been really important to us. Some of the other things I would say just about the value setting process is, I think we wanted to kind of look at it and think about it in kind of a more linear way and realize very, very soon that it was not that. So there was a lot of time talking to other groups about work that they have done, our own internal process, and that I've walked you through. I think being frustrated by our internal process and to the testament of CTIPP as an organization, as a board, there's a real commitment of wanting to get this right, to have the values that we really were going to live as an organization. So it was really important to us to really put a lot of thought into this. So this was really a long process for us. I would say maybe a little over a year. And part of the reason we kept coming back to the values, because all the other things that we were bringing up really came back to just that question. Things about what consensus means for you. What does it mean to be inclusive? What does it mean to have a culture of belonging? Those are all values. So I think we realized about halfway through that if we really didn't have a clear sense of where we were as an organization and our values, it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to kind of make the changes that we want as the organization. I think sometimes we see that quite often. You'll look at organizations, you'll see their website, you'll see how they function with people, and you'll feel that sense of, I see what's in writing, but how I'm experiencing the organization isn't consistent with what you've put out there as your mission, vision, and values. And we really wanted to make sure that we could have that alignment. It's something I think we're always continued to striving to move toward. So it's a little bit of the background on the committee and our process. I want to turn things over now to Jonathan Enix, who is one of the wonderful volunteers who worked with us throughout the process and for whatever reason decided to stay. And we're so excited to have him with us. So Jonathan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Tina. And yeah, just to echo, this was a wonderful opportunity for us. My colleague Nat and I both felt that this was just a learning opportunity, just a wonderful experience to dive into some really great literature and learn ourselves as well. Also, let me say sorry for my wonky lighting. I had it perfect in here, and my cat and I got in an argument right at the beginning of the meeting about whether or not this window blind should be open, and he won that argument. So this is what we're dealing with. You might be able to see me a little bit, but it's okay. If you don't. We're really just going to take a look at the slides. So the purpose of what I want to do today with these slides is really to talk over and to kind of hand the tools out. If you wanted to do a thematic analysis as sort of a look at your own organization or literature or ideas or whatever it might be, then here's how that might happen. So a thematic analysis is a form of qualitative inquiry. It's a method of qualitative analysis. And this is just a fun little image here. Let's just walk through this graphic real quick. The step one of your thematic analysis is just to pull in everything you're going to read, right? Just gather it up. Step two, we're just going to read through it. They suggest reading through everything in entirety. I'm not opposed to any sort of circularity, right? Yeah, and if you want to turn your cameras off and lean in, you don't have to turn your cameras off. I promise I'm not going to look up your nose, but I know some of this is small and you want to lean in, and I like to do that too. But we're just gathering our data. We're reading over that data. In step three, we're going to go through and code our data, and that's where we're going to spend our time today. We're going to really dive in at visually, kind of what that looks like. Just a couple examples of that. We're going to spend time coding our data, and then in step four, we're going to create these sort of categories that encompass our codes. Maybe I'm writing a similar words many times. The same code is showing up many times, and so I might say, oh, this is maybe a category, or these things are falling in together, right? Step five, my favorite part, we're going to take a break. We're going to incorporate time into our alchemy, right? We're going to give it a rest. We're going to think about some things. We're going to come back to it and circle through. And then step six, we're just going to keep refining, okay? We'll go ahead to the next slide. There were some fun pictures there. This is the same exact thing. If you're a person who prefers words over pictures, this is just me translating that picture we just looked at into words. The steps of a thematic analysis, if you were to conduct this yourself, are to gather and read your data, to intuitively code that data, and I emphasize intuitively there because this is about our engagement with the text, right? Or the things that are coming to our minds, right? The themes that are occurring to us as we're reading. Step 3, we're going to create and define categories to sort those codes. Step 4, we're going to refine our categories to represent the themes, the big themes we identify. We're going to try and reduce that into as sort of an overarching picture as we can. And then again, 5, we're just going to revisit over time. We're really going to respect time, the process of time, and coming back to things over and over again. Go ahead with that next slide. And you can go ahead to the next one. What does it look like to create codes? Now, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to read all of this. We don't have to get all of that close right now to read this. This is really just a visual, right? But just walk with me here for just a second. Let me just maybe read that first paragraph out for us. And if you want to follow along, that's fine. Um, so let's just read it. Let's just take it in. It is through taking on transformation with an eye toward trauma-informed strategies that a profound paradigm shift can occur. A trauma-informed approach urges us to critically analyze the interpersonal and structural contexts that shape our communities and the agency and well-being of the people within them, right? And we could keep reading. Let's hop to the next slide. And this is the same thing. Let's just take it in for just a second. The same passage I just showed you, and I've just scribbled on it. Okay. So this is our coding step, right? We've gathered our data, we're reading through it, and this is what coding looks like. And yes, it is straightforward. It is intuitive. So let's just glance at kind of what I've done there. I've kind of taken key words, right? I've even kind of underlined. You can see in the passage where I've underlined, and probably for just about every underline I have, I've written a little note over in the margin. You can see my first underline is taking on transformation. I thought transformation was a good code to see that word stood out, right? And so see, this is going to change over time, right? This is going to build over time and really, really adapt. We're looking at 4 paragraphs here, and I've pulled what, maybe 15 initial codes, right? So go ahead and click to that next one. Okay, and you can go ahead and click to the next slide as well. This is the same passage, just another example here. I'm just, again, giving you visuals here of what creating these codes looks like. This very intuitive process of just reading through, underlining the sort of big meaning words that are sticking out to us, and we're going through and notating there, right? We're just taking note of everything that's there. And you might notice too, if you glance really close, then I've put a couple little, I like to color everything. I'm very color, my brain is color coded. So I like to I put little green dashes a couple times in there or tally marks. And that's what that is. There's my numerical device, my quantitative part of this qualitative analysis is I'm going to see those things. I'm going to begin to tally and just really keep a record of how of these codes that are appearing and how many times they're appearing. Okay. I don't want to plow ahead. If anybody wants to glance at this a little bit more, and we'll have the slides later that you can really go in and look at the details here. But if anybody wants me to pause, feel free to interrupt. But we can go ahead to the next slide.
Yeah, Jonathan, and you might have said this, but these, like what you were doing the thematic analyses on, were the documents that CTIPP had put out, right? The first one was the uh like community change piece, and this one was, I assume, the aligning accessibility and belonging, right? Just
It,
for
I'm
clarity.
not sure, to be honest with you, which screenshots I pulled these from. This might have been a toolkit of some sort. I don't remember. But yes, yeah, thank you for clarifying that. These were, when we began our thematic analysis, we started by looking at the data that we pulled was the outward facing uh, literature of CTIPP, things posted on their website, articles published, and so on and so forth. So that's what we're, yeah, that's the context. Thank you, Jesse. All right, and here again, I'm not asking you to read all this. Don't worry. This is just a visual, right? So they're on the left. I've just topped up all those codes, right? And there are hundreds of them, right? This is just a screenshot of a few. We're going to end up with a lot of codes, okay? And I'm just going to take those. I'm tallying them. I'm noticing how many times they came up. I'm seeing maybe some similarities and connections among all these hundreds of codes, and maybe these hundreds of codes could be sorted into 5, 10, 15 sort of categories, right? So that's what this visual here is representing. We're taking all those codes there on the left, and just a couple examples I've come up with here are of the categories that emerged were trauma-informed approaches and resilience, and then there on the bottom, community engagement and empowerment. And if we can go ahead and click to the next slide. We're just continuing on here. Again, very circular, our steps, right? Like we're taking steps, right? We gathered our data, we're coding our data, we're moving forward and developing categories, right? But it's very intuitive and kind of circular. Maybe we're coming back and changing things as we're going, so on and so forth, right? So here is just a visual representation of sort of these big ideas that we came up with, sorting all of these codes into these sort of bigger categories: education and skill development, community empowerment, and so on and so forth. All right, next slide. Okay. And just as a result, just to share the results of our specific analysis with CTIPP, the things that we had pulled from the sort of when we reduced it as much as we could, perhaps. And there's no fine line, there's no like defining line there, right? Again, it's an intuitive process. But what we sort of walked away with is what we felt were sort of the overarching, all-encompassing themes represented in CTIPP literature, both the outward-facing and eventually inward-facing, were these six themes here: trauma-informed approaches and resilience, community engagement and empowerment, systems level change, social justice, dismantling oppressive systems, building networks of community and practice, capacity building and sustainability, and education and skill development. So we felt that those things were sort of the six categories that that were present and prevalent across CTIPP literature. We can go ahead and click to the next one. I said that was our step of finalizing results, but let's finalize them again, right? We're never at the end. We can always, that's the part of the help of thematic analysis. You might even argue the ultimate goal of thematic analysis is to sort of capture and recapture your thinking, right? The ways people think about and interact with your literature, with the things that you're putting out. So in conjunction with the things that we pulled from literature and also with work that the committee had done, we sort of, this was our maybe sort of just one form that we might have been able to phrase our takeaways, that maybe these values that we were searching for um, were belief in the worth and dignity of all human and living things. So these major ideas here, right? Creating systems that allow people to reach that, and maybe, oh, and we argued about these words: to allow, I don't know about the word, reaching full potential. And then three, sort of looking at the focusing our or having our focus on the field of neuroscience, things like that. And then we've sort of restructured those categories again. Okay, next slide. Just a reminder to keep it fluid. We're revisiting things over time and we're being very intuitive. Next slide. All right. So honestly, folks, that's about it. And that may seem very simple, and I actually hope it does, but the results of something like this, to take the time and to go through like this and line by line, be thinking about the words you're using, the ideas that those words represent, is really such a valuable takeaway. But it does take a lot of time, right? It's very laborious. Um, and probably, even though it's quite intuitive, takes a little bit of skill, or at least organization, various things like that, and time and energy. So just as an extra little tool for today, and we actually use this as well. I guess it's not just an extra tool for today. This was part of our analysis. We incorporated AI. Jesse, did I leave that link in there, where we can see the example? If I did not,
Yeah,
we
let
can
me
walk
let me
over.
try pulling that up on it. It won't click, I don't think, on.
Okay, if not, then I can share my screen real quick because I really just want to, again, really just as a visual, it's tons of stuff to read, but I really just want to see um, and compare, those six things that Nat and I pulled and saw in the literature when we went through by hand, and to see to see the powerful tool that AI is. We ran outward-facing documents through AI, and I will tell you, it's quite. I don't know how everybody feels about AI, but but it's pretty um, encouraging when you've done a lot of the work and then you type it into a computer and the machine spits out a lot of the same stuff that you said back at you, and you're like, "Oh, I saw that too. That's great." It's kind of affirming. So that is nice. And again, to really emphasize, it's a great tool. Um, if you don't have a plethora of volunteers running around to say, let me look at all your literature and read through it for a year, AI is a great tool to have.
Yeah, you can share your screen if you want to go ahead and
Oh, excellent.
go on.
Right. Let me do that real quick here. Do, do, do. All right. Can everybody see that? Starts out with the green highlighted thing here. Says you said. Let me zoom in a bit. Is that all right? Is this something people can kind of see? Okay, great. So again, we're not gonna read all of this, but just to say, I gave you an example prompt there in the slides, and here's that exact prompt again. I just went to ChatGPT in this case, and I said, please conduct a thematic analysis on the documents that I'm going to share with you. Highlight words and honestly, you could probably stop there. I like to be as specific as possible just to really give it some clear direction. Highlight words and concepts that appear most frequently and try to condense the analysis into fewer than 10 themes. Try to make sure there's as little duplication as possible among those themes, right? So the same task I gave to myself, I gave to the computer, right? And very eager to serve, ChatGPT says, absolutely, give me those documents. I'll read them right away. And sure enough, it produced 8 themes here. And I think every one of them we also had mentioned. There's understanding trauma and its impact, and maybe it's worded slightly differently here. But you can see here, we're not going to read every one of these, but they've given you these various themes that emerge and a little bit of explanation for each of them. I asked some additional questions here. What can you tell me about the assumptions these authors make in the documents, right? That's what a powerful tool, right? So again, I'm really just kind of highlighting here the uses of things that ChatGPT, if you don't have the time to do this by hand or to supplement the work that you're doing by hand, these are some really powerful tools. And it shows me right away. It says they make all sorts of assumptions here, right? And ChatGPT himself suggested, would you like me to explore how these assumptions influence the effectiveness? Like they keep the conversation going, right? So absolutely, let's walk into that. They give me some strengths of the assumptions, right? Later, I'm able to question down here, the last thing to highlight. Um, do you have any recommendations about clear ways to measure these outcomes that you've measured? So these are questions that we often find ourselves asking anyway, right? In the environments that we're in the work that we're doing. And so here it is, lots of suggestions, and you know, it's AI, it's generative AI. Some of it's wonderful, some of this is beautiful, top of the world stuff, and some of it's junk. Filter through, use your discretion. But it's a great tool to use. All right, I believe I'm done there. Um, and I'll just kind of say, anybody have any questions, thoughts?
Folks
Thank
can
you all.
also put questions in the chat. And I know that we're going to have some time for group discussion. But just, I know Tina said it earlier, and Tina, I'll hand this back over to you. But without Jonathan and Nat's support, we would not have gotten nearly as far as we did, right? We are a small organization, as so many of us in this movement are. And we had one-time grant that, Tina discussed the work with the consultant, but Jonathan and Nat's volunteerism was huge for us. And as a small team, we have policies to use AI in ethical ways. But there are ethical ways to use it. And as a small team, it has helped us go really far. And I know it's hard to see on Zoom because we're all the same size, but Jonathan's 6'8", if you don't mind me sharing that, my man. And he made as big of an impact, if not bigger, on our organization in this work. I mean, truly, the work that Jonathan and Nat did, Jonathan from the bottom of my heart, and to Nat, if they're listening, just um, took us leaps and bounds ahead of where we had been when you first got involved. And so thank you for continuing to volunteer with the committee, and thank you for the really, really awesome work that you did with and for our organization. Tina, I'll pull the slides back and hand the mic back over to you.
Thank you. And just seconding and thirding everything that Jesse said about Jonathan and Nat, really wonderful. Just a little bit of how they worked with the committee. And Jonathan mentioned that they were both members. The other thing that they did was really wonderful, and it's really important in qualitative analysis, just getting feedback and confirmation from all the different parts of the organization, because it's one thing for AI to tell us something and for the committee to say something, but they were really great about really working with us and saying, okay, is this what you're seeing? Is this really consistent with how you're experiencing the organization? So I thought that was also really helpful and valuable. Again, as I said earlier, I think we see ourselves sometimes in a certain way. But it's important to make sure that there's like that perception is really consistent across the different ways that CTIPP comes in contact with the community. And that's why I've transitioned to why we're so excited to talk with you and share what we've come up with and our values and get your feedback today. Next slide. So after that presentation and the amount of work, five really powerful values really came up for CTIPP and are the values that we're putting forward for you to give feedback and reflect on: justice, transformation, learning, civic health and well-being, prevention of adversity and trauma. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time unpacking what those mean for us, because really we're wanting to get some sense of how you're experiencing those as you interact with CTIPP, and do those seem to ring true to how you're experiencing us as CTIPP, and if they do, how. And we could talk about how and how that's coming into play for you. If there are gaps there, what are some of the gaps? And we really look to you as leaders who are out in the community doing this work. So really, really anticipate. I'm excited about getting your feedback. Jesse, next slide. So we're going to transition to a breakout or an individual reflection. I know everyone doesn't necessarily love the Zoom room and the breakout, so definitely an option, but would love to hear your feedback. And we have a few questions. We like the magic wand comment. If we could wave a magic wand and have CTIPP live each of these values, what would it feel like as a community partner or a funder? We really appreciate your feedback as someone who is doing this work at the community level, but also someone who probably works with funders and thinking about what they're looking at, what they're prioritizing. From your perspective, is there alignment with our work and community needs? We really look to you as the experts on what's going on at the community level. So really wanting to make sure that there is alignment between what we're putting forth as a vision for CTIPP and how you're trying to address unmet needs at the community level. And along those lines, are there disconnects in the work that we're doing and the practice that you're seeing just based on your time interacting with CTIPP? And are there other values you'd like to add or any general feedback you want to share with us around this process? So those are the questions we'd like you to spend some time with. And Jess, I don't know how much time you were thinking you wanted to give people.
Yeah, so I don't know how much time there is. So want to be mindful to make sure that we can get to the advisory committee. I am here. I'm going to stop sharing. I will pull up that slide, but just so folks have them, um, wanted to share the five values that Tina went over that we're asking you to respond to, and look at as well with those questions. As I ramble, we know that a lot of folks, two things. One, there is not a ton of capacity sometimes for folks that are joining these calls to speak on the calls, right? And so we recognize that some folks prefer independent reflection, while other folks do enjoy breakout rooms and being able to connect to others. And so while I'm talking here for a second, if you want to be in a breakout room, please send me a chat right now so that way I can create the breakout, and we will have probably somewhere around 8 to 10 minutes for
Mm-hmm.
people to connect. And during that time, for those who are not able to connect, we will leave time for independent reflection. And I can open up a breakout. And if there aren't enough people in the breakout, or who want to break out, Tina, I wonder if we just want to
I see
give,
a few.
yeah, like 3 to 5 minutes for, well, we've got a couple people that want to be in a breakout. And so, um, if it is, if there's anybody else who wants to be in a breakout room, please put that in the chat now. Okay, so we've got one breakout group. So we're going to do 8 minutes probably in a breakout room. For the folks who are doing the breakout, you won't be able to see these questions. I'll put them in the chat so you know. And so I will go ahead and create that for everybody else. Please, um, join in with or do a sorry, I'm trying to create the breakout rooms as I'm speaking here. Please just answer the questions through independent reflection because we'll come back to a large group activity here
And
for the group. And
Jesse,
so,
before you send people
yeah,
away,
please.
we would love, we're hoping in terms of our process and where we're at, we're hoping to finalize our values at our next board meeting in April, and would really like to have as much from you in writing or verbal. I'll take notes when people come back so we can add them. One of the things that we're looking and wanting to do is, we've put out these values, but we really want to kind of give a sentence or two about it, what it means for us. And so along those lines, we really want to hear feedback from you about what it means for you as a CTIPP CAN member. So if you're in a breakout room, if there's just a scribe that you can appoint for that breakout room, and if there's only one breakout room, I might volunteer Jonathan for that role, but just anything that we can get running is really wonderful if you want to make use of the chat as well.
Jonathan, do you mind taking that role for the breakout group? There is only one.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Appreciate that very much. All right, so breakout room, I'm about to open it up. You'll see the 8-minute timer up in the top right. And Denise, I will put the values and the questions in the chat right now. All right, so opening up that breakout room. Thank you all. And then for everybody else, please do the independent reflection time. We'll come back together for a large group discussion in about 8 minutes here. Oh. Tina, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
No, I'm not.
Folks are back if we want to go get started.
Tina, how are you?
No, I'm good. How are you?
Marvelous, simply marvelous.
Good. Good to hear. Hi, folks. Welcome back. I hope people have had really rich discussions in their breakout rooms. I did want to create a moment or two if anyone wants to share. Anyone who is maybe in the quiet reflection space, and you can add things to chat. If anyone wants to come off of mute, and Jonathan is sort of the facilitator for the breakout group, if you want to unmute and share as well, that would be great. So I see you off mute. Are you wanting to comment?
I am sorry. I was just seeing if somebody else wanted to go first. But yeah, we can.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah, I guess all this. We did have a wonderful discussion. Thank you, folks who were in our breakout session. And I think we'll just maybe talk about this. Is I think a big theme, connected real quick thematic analysis, real quick on our conversation after the meeting. But a big theme I think that we talked about in our breakout was meeting people where they're at, not being so restricted by jargon or holding ourselves up with our jargon, right? Keeping all this information for ourselves um, um, and maybe even if we can just maybe bring that discussion here, if somebody wants to make comments there, we talked about that from a few different angles. I think maybe from a few different questions there. What does it feel like if we're aligned? It feels ecstatic in our bodies. We're feeling elated. We're feeling congruent and aligned. Like our work is meaningful, um, and so on and so forth. But if there are barriers between us, if there's disconnects, maybe a lot of times it circles around um, words and jargon and sort of trivial disconnections in that way. I don't know that I formed a great question there. um,
I thought that was great. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that, how it might be showing up for you in terms of the values that we've put out as an organization. What might feel like for you. I'm even reflecting about this presentation itself and having a little anxiety. But the more people can share, if there's some specific things that come to mind for you, that'd be great.
Dr. Long?
Hi, thank you. So I was in the breakout room with Jonathan and the rest, and I think one of the things that comes to mind for me is I'm acutely aware of the political time that we're in. Um, I, being a researcher, think about efficiency and effectiveness, and I can appreciate how much of what CTIPP does is designed to push, as I understand it, and feel free to correct me, please correct me if I'm wrong, but to push policy as well that prioritizes and validates the need for trauma-informed practices at the local, state, and national level. And I would feel that the work is courageous to maybe understand how we're going to do that right now. And not just right now, but also like there are states at which perhaps the idea of trauma being a motivator for what people might consider untoward or antisocial or criminal or whatever, right, type of behavior, they think it's an excuse rather than a potential reason. So I don't know what you want to do with that, but I wanted to just proffer that in addition to what Jonathan shared about our conversations.
Really, really appreciate that insight, Dr. Long, and just topping in to say not incorrect in terms of what we do and what we work to do. So appreciate that. Sue, I see you're off mute as well.
Yeah, we also said that we need to make sure that we are reaching out to everyone, because a lot of times disability organizations, mental health organizations, whatever, tend to reach out for this. And a lot of businesses don't even know what it is yet or understand the definition. So moving beyond that, and also making sure we're not siloing information about disability or mental illness or culture or those kind of things, but that we're working together with all those pieces to bring one whole together.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Sue. Are there any other insights, whether from the breakout group or folks who were doing independent reflection? And Lisa, that's a beautiful example of being able to use the chat box to share. Because I know that you were doing independent reflection. Tina, I'll hand it back over to you. I'm just reading Lisa's comment in my head.
And thank you. I'm listening and processing and just reacting. Really great feedback. We're very excited to keep you updated about our next steps in the process and continue to get feedback and partner in thinking with you about this work. So I want to thank you for taking the time for that. Jess, if you can put the slides back up. One other thing that we want to talk with you about today. So this is, speaking of AI, my partner did an AI search for what a wisdom circle looked like, and this is what AI came up with. I don't know what I had in mind, but AI thought that this is what a group of wise folks look like, and I can't disagree necessarily. But that to say, I hope that it's really clear that we really value the feedback of this group and people who are working in the community in a way that sometimes we as a national organization can't always be able to be in all of the places that you are. That being said, we're really looking and thinking about what an advisory body might look like for us, and you'll hear me use like 5 different names because we really haven't settled on, I think, what makes sense for CTIPP. We've talked about a wisdom circle, we've talked about advisory council, a group that really are people who are going to help guide us, because we know as an organization, as a small organization, even with our board, we need to have different perspectives and different feedback. So just sort of thinking about work that you've done with advisors or mentors, I think sometimes the best feedback we get from people is based on their lived experience. So some questions I wanted to ask you about, and again, if folks want to unmute, they can, or if they want to make use of the chat, that's great. But if you could tell us a little bit about someone who's been an advisor or a mentor to you, and what about them? What are the qualities or actions that really made them effective and successful in that role? We're really trying to think about what it means for us as CTIPP to kind of have that sort of presence. So would love to hear from you just about from your experience. What are some of the qualities of someone who's been a great advisor or a mentor to you? And anyone who wants to unmute or wants to use the chat.
I would say I see a difference with advisor or mentor. So mentor a lot of times is someone who's reflecting back to me what they're hearing. They're encouraging me to see myself. And I would say an advisor is more somebody who has more experience than I do, who may see, have more wisdom as to where I should be looking as I'm moving forward.
Great, thank you, thank you. That's a great clarification. Thank you. Any other thoughts, examples about advisor or mentor? I think I sort of thought about those words interchangeable, but it's great to really, yes, those are different ideas, both really valuable, I think. Dr. Long, willingness, courage to provide conflict, difficult feedback, and understanding of the landscape that I'm navigating. Yes, definitely. I think we've said difficult a few times, but that's an important part, right? It's not about us coming together and hearing all the great things that we're doing. It's the things that are tough. Any other questions or any other thoughts? And I see Jonathan. I was just thinking today about a mentor I had about 20 years ago, and it occurred to me to describe their work in me as planting a seed of peace in my self-questioning heart. Wow, that's beautiful. Wow. And thank you for that really thoughtful feedback. A few other questions I really wanted to ask. When you're seeking advice or guidance, what specific qualities do you look for in an advisor, mentor, or coach? We're throwing in the coach as well. I think there's that element of us not really always knowing where we want to go, and sometimes we do need that nudge. So, what kind of things, what's important for us in terms of what we're looking for, what you've looked for in those roles? I'm getting a lot of great comments in the chat, so I'm going to read them. Someone who's able to listen, process with me, but encourages me to walk out the steps while being available as a support. For me, advisor, mentor have provided a balance of big picture thinking with reality and environment. Yes and yes, that's great thoughts, great suggestions. Anything else that comes to mind about qualities you think are going to be really helpful for an advisor, a mentor, or a coach? Subject matter expert, disruptor. Disruptor. We added that. Someone who is well resourced, a solid, effective communicator. Yes, definitely. So last question, if you've been a part of an organization with an advisory group, council, wisdom circle, or any sort of similar body, or you served an advisory role or a mentoring or coaching role, all the things that we've talked about, what aspects of that experience were really meaningful or impactful for you? And what are some of the challenges that you've encountered, and how were they addressed? I can add from my vantage point, I spent a lot of years being in advisory groups and also convening them in government. I work in local government, and we often convene advisory groups and councils. And some of the challenges that we have struggled with is making sure there's a difference between giving advice and really being able to kind of be heard and have impact. And I think that's where I hear folks kind of hitting at when they're sort of talking about the difference between an advisor, a mentor. So I think for me, that's been a struggle, making that role really meaningful. Some of, the role of an advisor is I can give you advice, you don't have to take it. and really wanting to make that work meaningful. And I see some more comments coming into the chat. Not saying real things for fear of stepping on toes or disrupting the status quo. Absolutely, that comes up quite often. That idea of being courageous and giving that difficult feedback. Sometimes that's hard. Sometimes organizations, groups aren't ready or able to hear it. So there's really sometimes some vulnerability that comes into play and some mutual trust. Open discussions where not everyone necessarily agreed on the steps, but the overall outcome goal was the same. So that really respect and honoring a process and respect for that sounds like that's something that really makes a group work and makes that process really meaningful, which is, I think, really important as we sort of think about bringing in DEI, and some of what that means is it is about hopefully building some meaningful consensus within the group, sort of giving this feedback. Having real intense policies that advance internal people development and healing and accountability. So seeing some themes today, that idea of having something that's intense, that has really, that's also real, that idea that it's real. I think that that's an important thing to kind of emphasize, because sometimes these groups are kind of there's a perception that they're for show. And what you're doing and what you're contributing isn't necessarily perceived as fully as you want it to be. So wonderful feedback and ideas and thoughts. And please keep them going in the chat. If you could add the questions in the chat, people want to continue to respond. I do want to move us along to the proposal that we have for CTIPP for an advisory council, body, you name it. Whatever we come up, we want to really definitely, this is helpful as I'm hearing people talk about language and thinking about, what the name should be. So all of this is appreciated. This is a working description that we have that is very, very far from being anything that's a final document, but we felt it was really something to get on paper, just to start the process. So this is where we're at as of this week in our description. As CTIPP continues to grow, we're actively seeking volunteers to join our advisory council group. The group will support us by serving as an incubator for innovative ideas and strategies, giving voice to community concerns to foster greater accountability for CTIPP, increasing CTIPP's capacity to establish strategic partnerships and build networks, offering feedback on CTIPP's strategic direction, and supporting our fundraising efforts. And this is certainly, these are the things that we sort of brainstormed that we thought would be great places to start. But we'd love to hear from you about what's missing from this list. Does this seem realistic for a volunteer group? Is there something here that we really should be prioritizing, or is there something here that we've completely missed? Any initial thoughts or reaction? Again, please feel free to make use of the chat.
I will just share, Tina, that it's my hope that folks who engage in our CTIPP CAN calls, all of you, will help fill out a lot of the advisory or council or wisdom circle, whatever the formal title we give to it, with your wisdom from the work you all do across the country, around the world, as well as your engagement with CTIPP. It means a lot as we continue to grow stronger as an organization.
Absolutely. I probably bake in a bullet point related to giving honest feedback and being trauma responsive, aware themselves. Oh, wow. Thank you so much for that. I think sometimes we can lose sight of that. And I've seen that happen in groups that I've worked with over the years. So I think that that's a really important to put in there that this is lifelong learning, but that we're all on that journey, and that's part of being a good advisory member or someone who becomes a member of our wisdom circle. Thank you so much for that. Any other thoughts? The values should be included with any description. Absolutely. Thank you. And we will definitely make that revision. This is really great feedback. I'm going to move us on to the next slide. It's actually, I think, one of our final slides. Based on your knowledge and experience with CTIPP and some of the issues are facing the TI community, who do you think would be the best candidate? And we've talked about definitely wanting to open up this opportunity to our former board members who are leaving the board, community members, broadly defined cross-sector potential partners. A lot of what CTIPP thinks about as a national organization is how are we able to really develop strategic partnerships with folks who may not know about the work that we're doing, but who can be real thought partners moving forward and help us move towards some of those innovative thoughts and ideas and strategies that we're always looking for. So I don't know if people have any initial thoughts about who they think might be the best candidate. I'm not thinking about a particular individual necessarily, but a particular skill set or an attribute that you think would be really helpful. Initial thoughts.
Tina, just one thing that pops into my mind, and this is something that we, I think, as a committee talked about way back when, and I don't know if I'm going to put this well into words or not, but maybe this idea of near science. I think that's what the context we were talking about it in. We sort of, I think I had suggested near science is one of our values, essentially, right? Um, and I think maybe it was Marcia had kind of pushed back and was like, I don't know about, what do we call it? If it's not, without the jargon, without those specific restraints on it, what do we call it? And so I think that's a good question. I think that's a good question to explore. Is the answer indigenous practices? Is the answer neuroscience? What is the blend there? How do we navigate that? Um, I think that's a community question that takes some time to answer and be good focus.
So you're thinking about topics. Are you thinking about topics we could focus on, or should be our advisory group?
Oh yeah, did I answer the wrong
You
question?
jumped ahead, but I will forgive you. That's definitely
I'm
a
sorry
worry.
about that.
No worries, no worries. I want to say, and this is sort of my generic non-answer, but still an answer. I want to hear from people who don't really know a lot about us. For me, I think this work really encompasses everyone, but often people don't really know or fully appreciate the impact of trauma in their lives. And I think we do sometimes a great job of kind of preaching to the choir around this work. So I want people who are coming from different sectors or maybe are not thinking about this work, but are thoughtful and are impacted by it and really excited to kind of take us in a direction that maybe we hadn't thought to go in. And that's a broad, ambiguous answer, but that's an answer I find myself putting out there a lot in government when I think about who I want to be talking to. It's the people who don't know anything about what I do and don't necessarily want to talk to me. So that's sort of my answer to that question or thought. And please, others, feel free to unmute or put your comments in the chat. And Jonathan, I think you're trying to nudge us along, which I absolutely appreciate. Topics that you topics that you think this group should be focusing on. You mentioned neuroscience, indigenous knowledge. So really those questions about, what's our focus as an organization in terms of when we're thinking about how we move forward as an organization, what are some of the things that are guiding us in terms of how we know what we know. The people who have encountered something that make them start to inquire, ooh, Yeah, I think we're talking about some of the same people. They've had a particular experience. They haven't quite named it just yet, but they're in that process and on that journey, definitely. Any other thoughts about topics that this group should be focused on?
So for me, I actually found this group because I work for the University of Arizona's Cooperative Extension, and I run community nutrition program in 2 counties. And so for the last year or so, they've really been doing some trauma-informed trainings in different settings. So that when we're going out and doing community nutrition, food demos, talking about health nutrition, physical activity, even gardening, that we are aware of having trauma-informed language and then our own lens. My background, this wasn't a big shift for me because I actually ran a high trauma childcare center and a recovery program for women for many years, but a lot of my coworkers, this was very uncomfortable conversation starters for them. And so this came through on one of our newsletters, and I have encouraged all my staff to attend it. So just knowing that more resources are out there, more training is out there. Maybe one type doesn't fit for everybody, but just, this language has to be there so that when we're going out, we're not accidentally re-traumatizing people, especially when you are talking about health, nutrition, eating habits, and all of that, because that can definitely have a lot of trauma wrapped into it. So just maybe kind of looking at that, like it's different for that kind of that public health lens. But it's been really neat for the last year to kind of find all those different resources.
Thank you so much. And that's, yeah, absolutely great feedback. And one of the things, based on just the community work that we do, a lot of people are saying, we don't really know anything about this trauma, but they are doing that work. They very much are, but they're not necessarily using that language. So being able to connect people, I think, around the principles and the ideas, and I love that example of working in nutrition where people probably didn't initially think that this would be a conversation where trauma would be important and thinking about trauma-informed language. But it ended up being really valuable, important, and that's a lot of what we're finding in our work is that people aren't using the word necessarily, but the concepts and the ideas around trauma are very relevant and useful and important to the work that they're doing. So making more of those connections and thinking about, what sort of language or messaging do we need to make those connections? What really resonates with people and helps them connect to this issue? I think that's really a great point. Any other thoughts about topics? We are at 3:26. We are dangerously close to 3:30. And you've been an amazing group. You've just you've hung in there for the whole 90 minutes. And this is wonderful. This is by no means the end of this conversation. Jesse, I'm hoping that you will add this to the agenda when you can. We're going to be thinking about in the next year, this wisdom circle, this advisory council, what it will look like, who will want to join us. And yes, you are absolutely our advisory group or our whatever we're calling it. You've been a really wonderful support to CTIPP, and we look forward to thinking about more ways to engage you moving forward. So thank you so much for spending 90 minutes with me today. And Jesse, thank you for the invitation. And Jonathan, thank you for the wonderful presentation. So I'm going to turn back over to you.
I think that that's as good a place to end the call as any. Tina, thank you for the presentation. Jonathan, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your insights and wisdom. If you have any interest in joining the Advisory Council Wisdom Circle, name yet to be determined or finalized, please don't hesitate to send an email. We'll definitely be reaching out. But if that's something that calls to you, please don't hesitate to let us know. And again, if there's legislation that you're working on, if there's ever any questions that you're coming up against, don't hesitate to reach out. We want to be a resource here for you. Until next month's call, be well. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you all.
Take care. Bye, everyone.